If you vote for me, all of your wildest dreams will come true.
Welcome, my friends, to the VFX for Motion podcast. You'll see it when you believe it. When I had the opportunity to work on Pirates of the Caribbean 3 at World's End, people would ask me, so, did you get to meet Johnny Depp? Now, you and I both know if you work in post-production, that means it's after. Johnny Depp was done probably 9 months before I ever got on that film. But there were other cases where I had the opportunity to work in production as a visual effects supervisor. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Visual effects supervising is wonderful. It gets you out from behind your desk and lets you use the skills you've developed at that desk in the real world. So, okay, fair enough. I never met Johnny Depp, but I met one of my idols, the late, great Chris Cornell, working on his music video about a decade ago. And I had the opportunity to go down to the bayou in Louisiana and work on a phenomenal film called Beasts of the Southern Wild that won at Sundance and at Cannes and got Academy nominations. So whether you're planning your own personal project or perhaps you even have the opportunity to do what I did and act as VFX supervisor, there are a number of things that will help you succeed in this role. The number one thing is to have a cool head and a good bedside manner. Now, what does that mean? Well, I think we all have some idea what that means. And I'm going to draw it out for you in some specific examples throughout this podcast. If I had to nail it down to specific things you can do on set, you want to often be invisible, particularly while the focus is not on you and everyone else is hard at work. Now, I'm going to talk about what you should be doing while you're invisible. And you should always be ready to listen, to provide an opinion when asked for one, or if necessary, courageous enough to throw a red flag if, again, called upon, or if people aren't paying attention to something important that at least could be mentioned to the producer who's controlling the budget, or to the DP who might be able to make minor changes to how the shot is set up, or perhaps to the set dresser who could get that green screen straightened out there in the corner. I think you get the idea. The director, of course, also is relying on you and everyone else on the crew to be able to answer specific questions. So the next most important ability is the ability to plan and to troubleshoot. And that really comes from experience more than anything else. Now, that's not just from supervision experience. That could be experience in anything. For example, if you were really a handy person and let's say you'd worked in construction, then you might know a lot about how to look at constructed things from other angles. So if you're trying to figure out how to get a specific shot with a specific rig, you might have something to draw on there. But also, of course, your experience with software and with working on shots is going to come into play. So it definitely helps to know the core skills of compositing inside and out. And those, again, are matching, keying, roto, and tracking, as well as 3D. And if there are any of those you're a little hazy on, it at least helps to know kind of what are the parameters. What are you going to want if you're a 3D artist? What are you going to need to get that shot tracked? And then if you get good at it, you can also be an authority on what are you not going to need to track that shot? What are you not going to need as a 3D artist? So you'll be asked in this role if something is a problem, and the crew is going to depend on you giving a clear answer in a timely fashion. Now, if you don't know, you can at least say why it's a gray area for you, and you may still be able to give a helpful answer. That's probably better than pretending like you know something that you don't. But the real point is everyone is on the clock and needs to get on with their job, and they need information that lets them do that. it really helps to have been on a set before you supervise, just to know the decorum and kind of what it's like. So if any of this interests you, you can probably find the opportunity to get onto a set, even if it's a completely self-produced independent project. And it's particularly helpful if visual effects are somehow involved on that project. One of the trickiest things that I alluded to just a second ago that only comes with experience is the ability to keep a somewhat light hand. So really, in some ways, the ideal experience for a film crew with a visual effects supervisor is that there were no hassles. And of course, the ideal way to do that would be to never create any and to pretend like there's no problem. And that's not really the job. On the other hand, continually flagging things that aren't necessarily that important, or it might be a question of approach, how you bring something up and how you know whether to let someone know that it really is important and it is going to be a costly thing not to deal with, or it's like a nice to have. Or if they bring it to you, let them know, like, yeah, that would be great, as opposed to, yes, I must. Well, I think you get the idea. For example, let's talk about tracking. So if you know confidently how much tracking markers are needed for a shot, which, let's face it, is less and less over time, you can save the production doing what they still have the habit of thinking they're supposed to do, which is just stick little markers all over everything that you're just gonna have to remove in post. You might also be able to help them work with those reflective devices that tend to reflect the lights, although that's really the DP's job. But you can help them understand how you're going to replace that screen so that they kind of know how to help you, because that's really what they want to do. Usually, a good DP, and there are a lot of them out there now that know visual effects, are really out there to help you, because ultimately, if the client walks away thinking, oh, this DP really knew how to make things work well in post-production where we actually spent most of our money, then, that is going to be a win for them. Yes, money is burned faster on set because there are more people standing around running the clock at any given time. So when you get good with things that are fundamental to filmmaking, like lighting and specifically maybe green screens, you get good at things like just looking at a setup with your naked eye and spotting problems. That's wrinkled, there's a shadow there, that's a dirty floor, it's never going to key, the shadows are crisscrossing, so they're useless, etc. Or if you want a useful shadow, let's do it this way, that kind of thing. Whether or not you've already developed that level of ability and experience, you can still do a completely professional job with just a couple of tools. Those are a camera and a laptop. In fact, that is generally the must-have equipment for the on-set supervisor. And if you only have one of them, make it the camera. Now, whether you're doing all the visual effects for the project yourself, or whether you're handing them off to a studio that's going to make $250,000 doing effects that you'll never see and you'll never meet these people, and a year later you'll hear that the thing came out and maybe you'll see it. Whoever is working in post-production is relying on you for a record of what they're working on. And that's principally going to come in the form of photos. Now, particularly if 3D elements or an entire 3D environment is being created in post, or not even an entire environment, but let's say a set extension, you're going to be expected to capture HDR lighting reference. And that's generally done in a couple of different ways. It requires a camera that can shoot bracketed exposures. At least at this stage, there's not a camera that in one shot can take HDRs as effectively as taking a number of photos in sequence from darkest to brightest. That's something you can look up on your own, but 10-year-old DSLRs will do it, as will more modern cameras. But the way that you take these photos is generally either using a reflective ball, which you could even get at a gardening store, or an ultra-wide fisheye lens, ideally 180 degree or more view, and those you can rent. You don't have to own that. So you can rent it if you have a DSLR body, or you could rent the whole thing. And what you do is you find a moment when you can go right where the talent is going to be, and you position the ball there, or you put your tripod with your fisheye lens camera there and shoot at least two sides of the thing, or whatever it's going to take to cover that point of view. The source light might be the sun, or it might be a lighting grid, might be available light, whatever it is. What you're doing is not only getting a record of it, you're actually getting an HDR of it so that it can be used in 3D software. Now, your best moment to get this is after everyone's set up, which usually is everybody scurrying around. Obviously, they're moving the camera into place and starting to get their shot. They're getting all the set dressed, but lighting is happy that they've got the thing illuminated properly. And maybe at this stage, makeup is getting the talent ready. Everybody's getting last looks. They're getting little bits of set decoration and stuff done. Maybe they're practicing the camera move if that's what's going to happen. And that's the perfect time to go out there and surreptitiously get your stills. If you've worked with, let's call it global illumination in 3D, lighting a scene with HDR reference, then I don't really need to say a lot more about this. But if not, these photos are literally going to save the 3D artist from having to recreate the scene lighting from scratch. That's the hope anyway. And more than that, you can also actually make a diagram of what the place looked like, or get a plan view if you can somehow get above it. Whatever is helpful to just understand what the lighting was. Always think of fail safes as well. Now let's talk about relationships. So I've found that on set, the director is going to ask me questions, but not all directors will. Some of them don't really want to ask visual effects questions, and they want to leave it to the DP. And then some cinematographers are not particularly visual effects savvy, and you hope that you get somebody who knows their way around that, especially these days. But those two are the ones most likely to either ask you direct questions or for you to be checking in with. However, they're also the busiest people on set and the ones having to make the most decisions. So really, you want to take a light touch there. And there are other people who aren't so busy who are also very helpful to you. One of those is known as the first AC, first assistant camera. And these jobs you see in the credits, they all have really specific things they do. So the first AC preps the camera for the shot. So if there's a lens change, back in the day, if the film had to be loaded, etc., they'd be doing that. But also, the first AC takes care of focus. So if there's a focus pull, that's the person who's going to do that. And along with that, takes all the measurements. So knows what lens was being used, keeps a log of what the aperture was in many cases, measures the distance from the camera focal point to the subject, the height of the camera from the floor. And this is all, as you can imagine, extremely helpful information for post-production. On a larger production, and one with a lot of dramatic content, you may very well also have a second AD. And that person, in my experience, is synonymous with the script supervisor. So even if you don't know what a second AD does, the script supervisor is literally the person on set who's watching the script and watching the shoot. And what is their job? Number one, continuity. So that's that thing, that you have to fix in post if they get it wrong. So that person can give you helpful information, and occasionally you might catch something that you want them to either keep track of or ask them about. Now, you'll also interact with technical crew on set who's involved with visual effects. So that could be grips, people setting up lights or your green screens. That could be somebody doing practical effects if you're doing any of that. And of course, if you're really having fun, it could be stunt people. You can shoot anything with your camera and should shoot everything of interest on the set or location. I mean, theoretically, you could just be taking photos all the time. You never know what could become part of either a virtual prop or a matte painting, or even a thing that you make that ends up saving you a lot of trouble where you'd have to go get the element somewhere else. If you don't know how to imagine this, think about maybe a place you lived as a kid and you only vaguely remember it, and you'd love to just see photos of all the corners and nooks and crannies and points of view that were in that house because it would be so evocative. Imagine shooting the environment where the movie's taking place like that, including things that are just in the ambient area that are part of the same world. You never know. So this all, again, means you are using a professional camera with a professional lens. And as I record this, that still means a camera that has a body separate from the lens. It should have glass that can create an image that maybe doesn't quite rival what they're doing with their Panavision or Arri Alexa camera, but good looking images. And that probably means it's not your phone, although phones are getting pretty damn good. And honestly, the bracketed exposures, for example, I haven't seen a phone do that. So the laptop piece is less necessary, but it gives you some opportunities. With a laptop and a camera, you can, say, take a shot of the set and test it out. Just test out a still, pull a key on a still. That's not going to be the same as what's coming off the camera, but getting the shot off the camera is going to be hard. You're going to have to go through the DIT, who's taking all the data. There's going to be a delay. Basically, you probably, at best, wouldn't get a hold of a shot from the camera until everybody's already long since moved on to where you can't do anything about it. Whereas, take a quick shot and just try it out. See, how bad are those shadows? What is that? Whatever's on your mind. You can just kind of try matching up the camera point of view or what have you. You can use your laptop to look at the lighting when you're not on set. Sometimes checking out a lighting setup while you're under these bright lights is really difficult. You can make an animatic. If there is some tricky camera move that everybody's waving their hands and nobody's quite worked out. There was a case on Beasts of the Southern Wild where I really wished I had done that because it turned out I didn't understand that we had this variable of a handheld shot. I mean, the whole movie was shot handheld, but had we tested it out, there was a specific thing about what they want to do on the shot that the handheld element really changed a bit. And we were fine, but there was a moment where I was like, oh, didn't expect that. And we could have planned it out with me just making a quick little mock-up. I could have done it in After Effects with little primitives. Visual storyboards, same thing. Animatics, basically a way to solve a visual question or a problem. And then, of course, there's everything else you do with your computer in post. So make a virtual set and position a camera, add a little pyrotechnics to something, color correct it, etc. Beyond that, it really helps if you're just confident about breaking down visual challenges into their component pieces and thinking of creative solutions on the spot. So this goes back to my person who, let's say, used to work in building contracting. So they're looking at a rig and they're thinking, well, you could put a jib arm out there and hang the camera off that and then suspend the talent over here. That kind of problem solving is one form of what I'm talking about. But really, at the end of the day, it's what is actually needed for the shot. So let's say we need a shot of an actor that's levitating far above the ground. So does this mean that we actually have to place an actor in a chair, a hazardous distance from the floor, with no visible protection harness or anything? Or if we do have a harness, how are we going to do that? Does it take some elaborate rig? Or is there a way to get this shot closer up without putting the actor in any danger whatsoever? What's that going to take? What do we have to worry about if we do that? You're not on your own thinking of this stuff unless you're making your own project, but it definitely helps to think outside the box. So what considerations are there going to be with lighting? How's it going to affect lens lengths? Because if you're trying to swap a long telephoto shot with something you'd have to shoot wider angle, that often doesn't work. What eye line should the actor have? That's something that nobody thinks about sometimes until you get into post and you realize it's a problem. How are you going to place the result into the final environment? That's really the name of the game. And how is that environment going to be fabricated? And what are you going to need that's only available on the day to get it? Now, film sets, let's face it, it's a game of hurry up and wait. They're actually really boring a lot of the time. So to close the discussion, I'm going to loop back to my number one point: cool head, good bedside manner. When you're out there, always be thinking of how you can best be using your time proactively, because a lot of the time it's going to feel like there's nothing to do. While you're doing that, have that sixth sense of what's happening, i.e., maybe you're working separate from where the crew is right now, and the shot that you have to worry about is actually the next location or the next setup or what have you. But they've got a question about that, and they want you available, or they want you to be thinking about it. Just have a sense about what that might be, or go do a little scout, or whatever you can think of proactively that would be helpful. So there you go. If you have ESP and a little clairvoyance in your toolkit, you are absolutely ready to create visual magic. But assuming you don't have those, just be paying attention, be communicating clearly, be anticipating what will be needed, particularly in post-production. Do your best with any gray areas and difficult situations. And then just remember, if it gets stressful, it's never about you. At the end of the day, it's only about the needs of the movie.